Stations of the Street was produced by North Presbyterian Church several years ago. It's a journey with Christ through the eyes of those living in poverty. It's ours for Lenten reflection. It's called a street version of the Stations of the Cross, and I invite you to enter into the artwork produced by our friends from Cleveland. The first station, Jesus is condemned to death. We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you,
because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world.
This is the way it was. There he stands, the young Galilean prophet, beside Pilate in the balcony of the Praetorium. In the night just past, he has suffered betrayal. He has been dragged from one tribunal to another. He has been insulted, slapped, and spit upon. Most recently, he has been stripped, bound to a column, and whipped by 2 legionnaires, each wielding a set of thongs, weighted at the ends with pieces of lead and glass. There he now stands, beaten and bloody. Pilate has evidently hoped to arouse the pity of the people. Gesturing towards his prisoner, he says, "Behold the man!" But the crowd gathered howls, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Surrendering to the crowd, Pilate just washes his hands.
This is the way it is. How many others have heard society say, "We cannot tolerate you. We cannot help you. The world will be a better place without you. You must die." What goes through the mind of the condemned when he or she hears, "You are worthless. You are dead to me. You are nobody"? Over the centuries, many who have claimed to be followers of Jesus have stood with the historical community of the executioners, kings, politicians, judges, police, religious, and those anonymous ones who go along with the crowd. Jesus himself stood with the historical community of the executed. He did not stand with those who say, "You must die." He stood alongside those who are told, "You are dead to me." Such punishment to those called outcast is not what Jesus taught. Such punishment is what he suffered. But Pilate washed his hands and said, "I'm not responsible." Those who ignore the plight of the poor say, "I'm not responsible." Christians who proclaim Christ with their lips while their hearts are far from him say, "I am not responsible." The affluent Christian who spends thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours a year on sports, alcohol, fashion, drugs, and entertainment says to the billions of people caught in the unrelieved miseries of poverty, hunger, disease, and injustice, "I am not responsible." Many more than Pilate have washed their hands as the suffering of Christ has been condemned to death.
The second station, Jesus takes his cross. This is the way it was. The Roman centurion gives his orders. They tear off the purple cloak which has stuck to Jesus' wounds. The blood begins to flow again. 2 soldiers come with the instrument of brutal Roman justice, the cross. As they place it on the shoulder of the condemned, he staggers under its weight and takes hold of the rough timber to steady the burden. 2 soldiers drag Jesus on. Headed by the mounted centurion, the processional comes out of the Praetorium, and the death march begins.
This is the way it is. The cross is the symbol and the reality of nonviolent love, of suffering love, of voluntary postponement of gratification on behalf of others, of hurt endured in order to serve, to forgive, to be merciful. The bearing of the physical cross is just the final moment in an existence that has chosen to serve others rather than indulge itself. The cross of nonviolent love is not an isolated incident. It is a free choice of a radically different verbal pattern, thought pattern, emotional pattern, behavioral pattern. That is, it is the free choice of a radically different reality orientation and self-understanding. When we sign ourselves with the sign of the cross, we are symbolically saying to ourselves, to the world, and to God, that we choose to pick up Christ's cross and follow his way, that we choose, as he did, to bear the cross of nonviolent love unto death. Cross our heart and hope to die.
The third station, Jesus falls the first time. This is the way it was. Even though it is late in the morning by now, only patches of sunlight fall into this narrow road between tall buildings, with the stench of the street and the close heat from the breath of those who shout insults and condemnation. It is a good thing that the way of Golgotha is not long. His back and shoulders are a mass of raw wounds. The rough wood of the cross bites deep into his flesh. He stumbles on the uneven pavement and, without strength to regain his balance, goes down on his knees in the filthy roadway under the weight of the cross.
This is the way it is. To fall under the abnormal burden of the cross of nonviolent love is painful. For the person who wants to love, who believes in forgiveness, who desires to serve, who wishes to reconcile, who is committed to patience, kindness, meekness, and mercy, for this person to fail hurts, and hurts deeply. Fatigue, ignorance, fear, selfness, false securities, self-righteousness, escapism, and idolatry stand always ready to trip up, to knock down the bearer of the cross of nonviolent love. But Jesus teaches that when, for whatever reason, we fall under the humanly impossible burden of the cross of nonviolent love, our task is not to give up, stay down, walk away, or change direction. Our task is to get up and to continue in the Spirit of Christ on our journey to Calvary, our pilgrimage of love for the other.
The fourth station, Jesus meets his mother. This is the way it was. The soldiers in their red tunics and glittering bronze helmets keep the crowd back against the walls of the buildings along the way. Surely not all the crowd are curious onlookers of condemned outcasts. Surely some are friends and secret sympathizers, silent out of fear of being condemned by the angry crowd as well. But now a woman steps out into the pregnant space in the crowded, narrow road, a woman of the poorer class, a woman of such sweet dignity and such love that even in her terrible grief, she reaches to embrace with tender hands of recognition. A rumor goes through the crowd that she is his mother. As she gazes at the pain-racked body, the bloodied nose, the swollen lips, the thorn-bit brow, she cries out, "Jesus, my son!" These two look deep into each other's eyes, and their arms reach out, one for the other. Echoes of the prophet Jeremiah arise. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing in loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more.
This is the way it is. Can a woman forget her nursing child, Isaiah writes, or show no compassion for the child of her womb? Even these may forget, but I will not forget you. A poem by Julian of Norwich in the 14th century says, "Mothering God, you gave me birth in the bright morning of this world. Creator, source of every breath, you are my rain, my wind, my sun. You are my rain, my wind, my sun. Mothering Christ, you took my form, offering me your food of light, grain of life, and grape of love, your very body for my peace, your very body for my peace. Mothering Spirit, nurturing one, in arms of patience hold me close, so that in faith I root and grow, until I flower, until I know, until I flower, until I know."
The fifth station, Jesus is helped by Simon. This is the way it was. We are at the gate of the city now. The procession is moving more and more slowly. Each step that Jesus takes calls forth an agonizing effort, straining the battered muscles, wounding still more the cut and bleeding feet. The great timber, with its rough-hewn surface, has ground deeply into his shoulder. He slips in the filth of the street and sways, nearly fainting from pain. In order to speed the execution along, the centurion pulls a man from the onlooking crowd and orders him to carry the crossbeam for the condemned. The people whisper the man's name, Simon. Simon doesn't seem too enthusiastic about the job. His hands touch the hands of the prisoner, who was looking intently into Simon's face. There is a slight pause, and clearly, in this moment of transfiguration, something happens to Simon.
This is the way it is. How often do we fail to get involved for fear of guilt by association? How often do we join the crowd of passive onlookers? Can we hear the words of Mother Teresa when she said, "We can do no great things, only small things with great love"? How well I recognize Simon's resentment at his forced involvement. How we defend ourselves, rooted deep in pride. How we accuse the other of their poverty, their family connections, their infirmities. Oh Christ, how often have I wounded you in my brothers and sisters? I didn't know. I couldn't see you in them. Give me the look you're giving Simon. Help me by your look to see you in the face of my brothers and sisters. To help me carry each other's cross of nonviolent love is part of the purpose of the Christian community, the peace community. To love without condition is hard. To serve without desiring reciprocation is hard. To suffer without desiring retaliation is hard. How many of our brothers and sisters have grown weary and fallen under the harsh and dreadful weight of the cross of nonviolent love? Not because we failed to be heroically Christ-like, but simply because we were not Simon-like in our relations with them.
The sixth station, Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. This is the way it was. We are outside the city now, and the air is better. The day is getting warmer, but it is the salty sweat of extreme weakness that is running down the bloody, dirty face of the condemned man. The sweat stings the open cuts and stings the eyes. The man's terrible exhaustion and the pain of his torn body threaten to bring him down, but he drags himself along. Suddenly, another woman of courage comes forward from the crowd. She steps in front of Jesus, ignoring the shouts of the centurion and the hatred of the soldiers. With great tenderness, she takes a large, clean cloth and wipes the blood, sweat, and dirt from the prisoner's face. The soldiers and the angry crowd push her away violently, and the procession continues, with no concern for the one who loved the outcast. The woman kneels on the side of the street, holding the cloth, and the imprint of the face of Jesus is reflected upon the offering of her kindness.
This is the way it is. The poet says, "I am a part of all I have met. For good or ill, I leave my image on all who by whatever means enter into my life." What image is that the love of Jesus Christ should want to imprint on the lives of others? He or she should never wish to leave the impression of a person who desires power, the quick fix, the path of least resistance. Rather, he or she should, as a follower of Jesus, desire to leave the impression of one who is always merciful, patient, and kind, who is willing to take upon themselves the image of suffering, willing to take upon themselves the blood, sweat, and tears of the crucified ones in our world. The Christ teaches that to serve a suffering humanity is to encounter him. The victims of injustice are as sure of a sacramental offering as there is on God's earth. To risk encountering the other is to encounter the living God. The true image of God incarnate never would have been Veronica's, but for the fact that she saw pain and tried to do what she could to relieve it. What is left is the image of Christ staring back at us.
The seventh station, Jesus falls a second time. This is the way it was. How slowly we must go now. The prisoner is so weakened that each moment it seems impossible for him to take another step. The soldiers urge him on, but they are not so brutal about it now. They are more and more afraid that he will die on the way. The curious onlookers press in as close as they dare. There are always those who seem to thrive on the suffering of other people. Now, as the weak and bloody figure of Jesus pauses and sways, there is an audible gasp from the crowd. He goes down on his knees, and the collective stinking breath of the crowd issues forth in a long sigh as they push and grab for a better view. Two soldiers get him to his feet again. He attempts to straighten his body and, oh my God, tries to square his shoulders against the cross to go on.
This is the way it is. Down again. He rises from the street, leaving only bloody footprints to follow, living to dying, dying to live. Echoes of the crowd suffocate him, insult him and assault him and slam him to the street. Echoes born from the minds of ignorance, minds bombarded since childhood with notions like, the world will be a better place if everyone just follows his or her own selfish interest, or grabbing as much as you can while giving as little as you have to is what life's all about. Becomes a collective conscience to which the cross of nonviolent love seems like a crushing burden. Who can turn to it, accept it, and bear it without falling, especially when one knows all this effort results in crucifixion? Yet this is the death that leads to liberation, a freeing of the minds imprisoned by self-preservation. It is easy to find hope, security, and a future in politics, national pride, a football team, the military-industrial complex, Disneyland, drugs, fashion, alcohol, or the internet. It is nearly impossible in a consumer society to find hope in the patient, compassionate, selfless Christ love. Falling in love with such self-sacrifice is the only falling that I desire. If after our blindness throws us to the ground, our new Christ life will pick us up and give us the eyes of love, letting us fall with the oppressed in order to rise with them.
The eighth station, Jesus speaks to the women. This is the way it was. We have almost reached the place of the skull and the finish, but there is a group of women from Jerusalem gathered, weeping, beating their breasts in lamentation. Jesus pauses to speak to them. To speak to them. What strength it must take to speak. He calls them daughters of Jerusalem and tells them to weep for themselves and their children, not for him. He sounds like one of the old visionary prophets talking in broken phrases about times to come when the people will cry for the mountains to fall on them and the hills to cover them. He tells them to see this as only the beginning, and that in this world one reaps what one sows. The call is for them to pick up their own cross for the generations to come.
This is the way it is. Are you speaking to me, Lord? Are you telling me to skip the tears of false faith? Are you calling me to pick up my own cross and follow you? How your answer to the woman hits me as you say, I am going to die. Will I too sacrifice my life for the sake of others? Will I sacrifice my convenience? Will I sacrifice my reputation and my pride? How often have I been told, how often have we told ourselves, Nonviolent love does not work. In a world writhing under violence and oppression, do we hear the words of Jesus? As Jesus, brutally beaten in body and forced to carry the instrument of his own execution to the place of his death, looked at the women, what did he see in their eyes? Disbelief, sadness, confusion, despair, horror, desolation. How often have we, in our failures and fears and faint-heartedness, looked at the price tag of nonviolent love and said, "This is too much. I cannot pay it. There just has to be a less expensive way to save the world." But what is the other way? Will hate drive out hate? Will violence drive out violence? Will greed drive out our greed? Will cruelty drive out cruelty? We must realize that evil cannot drive out evil.
The 9th station, Jesus falls a 3rd time. This is the way it was. We have finally reached the foot of the little hill of Golgotha. Some of the people have hurried on ahead to get the best perches among the tombs to see the final agony. The condemned prisoner begins the short climb painfully. 2 soldiers pull him along by means of long ropes, but it is not enough. He falls again, this time full length onto the dirt and garbage of the path. Will he be able to go on this time? The soldiers lift the broken body of the condemned to his feet. Again, with tremendous effort, he rises only to carry his cross the last few steps. All the while, the stairs. All the while, the violent cries of anger.
This is the way it is. Did Jesus fall 3 times, or was it in reality 4 or 10 or 20? How often each day do I feel crushed under the weight of the cross of nonviolent love? Whether I forgive or refuse to forgive, serve or refuse to serve, pray or refuse to pray, the burden seems to increase. The greatest of saints, after a lifetime of effort, have often seen themselves as the greatest of sinners. This is not false humility. It is evidence that nonviolent love is a cross whose weight increases the more intensely one becomes aware of that it is the way of God towards life forever. How I long to take the easy way and in my weariness just forget the whole journey. Yes, to forget you, Jesus, and just drift with the crowd. And then you look at me and I can't do it. Where else is there to go? Apart from you, I am nothing. Keep on the path of love, Lord. Keep me on the path of love.
The 10th station, Jesus is stripped of his clothes. This is the way it was. In spite of his terrible weakness and the dizziness that goes with excessive loss of blood, Jesus has climbed to the summit of the hill. It is not very complicated, really. These Romans know their work. First of all, he must be stripped. Crucifixion is intended to be degrading, humiliating in the extreme. This stripping now is a horrible thing to witness. The soldiers are in a hurry to finish now, and they handle him brutally. There he stands, stripped and wounded.
This is the way it is. There is nothing beautiful about Jesus' crucifixion. He was beaten brutally and stripped naked, as billions of other oppressed people have been over time, even in our present time. The vested powers of this world always strip those who they wish to control, humiliate, delegitimize, discourage, and destroy. For if clothes make the man or woman, then the absence of clothes, or anything that would define our identity, mean that the thing before them is subhuman and non-person. To hide from the Christ stripped of his garments is to hide from the reality of the cross of nonviolent love. Must Jesus be willing to be stripped of his garments and identity in order to raise humanity to a higher love? Must Francis of Assisi be willing to have his family turn from him? Must Dorothy Day be willing to sacrifice reputation and convenience? Must Martin Luther King be willing to give his life in the cause of freedom? Yes. In a world saturated in the cause of violence, they and we must be willing to be stripped to our bones if we desire to live Christ's cross of nonviolent love all the way to the place of skulls and among those who have been judged to be outcast.
The 11th station, Jesus is nailed to the cross. This is the way it was. They laid Jesus on his back at the foot of the upright beam of the cross, which is permanently fixed in its place. His shoulders are on the cross beam. He has refused the drugged wine they would have given him. The executioner measures with his eye the arm's length, and setting the spike at the wrist, with one blow of the great hammer, he drives the spike deep into the wood. Jesus' face contorts in the aftermath of the first spike. Pain must be shooting through his hand and arm. Now the other arm is stretched out. Again the spike, wrist, great hammer, the wood, strike. They then lift the crossbeam with pulleys and ropes and nail-pierced wrists in place. It then takes just a moment, bending the knees and crossing the feet, to drive the third spike through into the lower part of the stake. Now it begins, the slow torture of crucifixion.
This is how it is. We remember the crucified poor. We remember those afflicted with a violent world, naked and vulnerable. The Lord of heaven and earth stretches his pain-racked body along the splintered cross, his choice. In this image of nonviolent love, of self-sacrifice, of self-giving, we can hear these words of the world. Don't talk to me of charity, of those who waste away to death in malnutrition, or who stump along on half limbs through endless leprous days. Don't mention the cries of sickly orphan children in a bombed-out wreck of a home, cries multiplied around the world. Don't ask me to think of women screaming in childbirth without medical attention. Don't make me hear the silence of death row and the cries of war's collateral damage. Above all, don't, oh God, don't make me look at you upon the cross. Don't make me listen to you dying for love and saying, you must love these, my little ones, as I have loved you. The violence of the cross is the ultimate call to the way of nonviolent love, the call of the Lamb of God. To choose the cross of nonviolent love is to freely choose to remain nailed to it until that day when the last person who has been crucified by the powers of the world has his or her spikes permanently removed. Gandhi said, if I have to be reborn, I wish to be born as an untouchable, so that I may share in their sorrows, sufferings, and the affronts leveled at them, in order that I may endeavor to free myself and them from that miserable condition.
The 12th station, Jesus dies on the cross. This is the way it was. It is now almost the middle of the afternoon. It was around noon when they lifted him up. Very soon after, the terrible thirst began, the frightful cramping in the muscles. Crucifixion is death by asphyxiation. His lungs fill with water, and he has a hard time catching his breath unless he pushes up by his feet to expand his chest. Pain fills every thought, and even in the midst of this, Jesus forgives the persecutors, welcomes a convicted criminal into paradise, calls on God as one forsaken, and commits his spirit to God. His mother is nearby, and Jesus makes sure community is sustained by inviting John to take care. Now the crowd grows silently agitated as the sky darkens and the bleating of the Passover lambs can be heard in the city as they are being prepared for slaughter. It is finished, comes the cry of the prisoner. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Jesus, the outcast Messiah, breathes his last.
This is how it is. I come before you, crucified lover of all humanity, and I am bowed and awed in the sight of such love. The death rattles, the open eyes, the limp, heavy, breathless body. This is how it ends and begins. On a small piece of dirt, on a small planet, in a small solar system of the cosmic reality that is God. Hydrogen continues to turn into helium on the sun. People in China and Finland and Germany go about their business. Microscopic life eats microscopic life in a drop of water. People continue to be sexual beings. Politicians and bankers continue to do what politicians and bankers do. Fear and romance and fatigue and dreams and truth and consequences continue the ebb and flow of human endeavors. All this and more continues to happen while the love of God is crucified for the sake of all. Does anyone know? Does anyone care? What difference does it make? Oh, set me free from the bondage of self-righteousness. Set me free to love all. Open my eyes to see you in all.
The 13th station. Jesus is taken from the cross. This is how it was. It is finished. The sky is like night, and the very ground shudders, rocks crack, and temples open. The centurion looks around in wonder at the picture of death and chaos. All he can do is believe that not only was an innocent man executed, but that Jesus was not crazy. He was the Son of God. Another soldier, oblivious to the revelation before him, thrusts a spear into the side of the body of Jesus to make sure it was dead. As blood and water issue from the last wound, the closeness of the great Sabbath added to the need to hurry. The body needs to be dead and buried now. A man named Joseph of Arimathea requests the body. Mary and some women and the disciple whom Jesus loved wait as each nail is pulled from one wrist, then from another wrist, then the feet. The body of Jesus is lowered into the arms of his mother. She receives her child with the grief of a mother, her silent tears falling as the busy industry of politics, as usual, rush to finish a day's work.
This is the way it is. Viewing the broken and torn body of a beloved is the most grief-ridden experience of human existence. When accomplished through violent injustice, it is a reflection of evil. The dying children of gang violence, the war-torn families, the mothers who bury their dead. God is in solidarity with the poor who cry out. God weeps for a violent world bent on its own destruction. This is the most conclusive evidence that the cross of nonviolent love speaks of Jesus' mission and our submission. Will we be there to claim the broken lives crucified by poverty? Will we be there to receive the body as it is taken down from the cross of fear, shame, hunger, and loneliness? Will you be there? Were you there when they crucified the poor?
The 14th station. Jesus is laid in the tomb. This is the way it was. The final act comes. Joseph of Arimathea returns quickly with the governor's permission to claim the body and to offer his tomb as a final resting place for Jesus. As the final light disappears and the city goes to sleep, a grain of wheat is placed in the ground, and the night waits to give birth to a brand new day. The first fruits of love are gestating in the dark.
This is the way it is, empty and silent. Thank God there is someone to offer this homeless man a grave. Thank God someone cares enough to offer dignity to the family as someone says, I recognize your humanity. Violence takes lives and chaos reigns, and then there is silence. The moment the bomb blasts, the bullet kills, the anger erupts, the decision to attack is made. Silence. Silence. Like a tomb. The violence, now darkness, cold silence. As the stone is laid to seal the crime, out of sight, out of mind, it is all over. Or is it? The person is placed in the grave, never to be seen, nor to see again, never to speak, not to be spoken to again, never to love, nor to be loved again. Never, never, never. One last moment, one last touch, one final kiss, a whispered "I love you, goodbye forever," and then the stone is placed over the tomb. An occupied tomb is no more a symbol of hope than a Nazi crematory. The dead body of Christ is a stark and irrefutable statement that a life of nonviolent love does not come without a cost. The silence of Christ gives witness that you may kill the body, but the Spirit of God's love is a seed that never dies. Remember those who laid in tombs of forgetfulness and yet hold the promise of resurrection. The blood of martyrs is the seed of the church.
The 15th station, Transformational Hope. We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you,
because by your resurrection you have transformed the world.
This is the way. Christianity is faith in the risen and existing Jesus of Nazareth, who is the Christ and who taught by word and deed that nonviolent love is the means of overcoming evil and death in all their manifestations. Jesus Christ's resurrection is confirmation of this message. God raised Christ from the dead to manifest the teachings of love. Nonviolent love will always win in the end.
Transformation is the birth of Christ within us. It is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. It is an inner spiritual experience of healing which allows us to be clearer channels and stewards of divine love. It manifests itself in a change in our relationship with God, others, ourselves, and all of creation. God in us serves God in others.
A prayer poem, Marginal Eyes. We do have faces and names, we do, even though you would prefer it to be otherwise. We do not fit your image of what a pretty street should look like, so you do not see us. You look out from your pretty houses, and your voices have always been there to shout us down. Our voices come attached to our names and faces and marginal eyes. Though our voices might be enfeebled one-on-one, as a group, we with names and faces and marginal eyes cannot be silenced despite your best efforts. We will be keening the loss of social justice, and the noise will be unpleasant to your ears. Like our names and faces and our marginal eyes bother your sense of what's right in the world, we do not wish to take your pretty streets and houses from you. All we need is that you acknowledge our names and faces and our marginal eyes.